Good evening and welcome to Gibson's Bookstore Remote. I am Elizabeth, the events coordinator for Gibson's Bookstore, and I am joined by two Hobblebush Books poets. This is our National Poetry Month poetry series in conjunction with Hobblebush Books, which is a wonderful New Hampshire-based publisher focusing in New Hampshire-based topics and authors. Tonight, our two poets are Rodger Martin and Henry Walters. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me this evening.
Thank you, Elizabeth and Gibson, for having us.
So glad to have the two of you here virtually with Pixels. One of the wonderful things about virtual events is that we can get people farther afield joining us, coming back home, so to speak, to hear our neighbors' poetry and the words. Both Rodger and Henry's books are available from Gibson's Bookstore, and we are open for in-store browsing, curbside pickup, and we are very happy to ship you a book. Gentlemen, please regale us with your verse.
Okay, thank you. Well, I think we're going to begin with Henry. We're each going to read one of our own poems, and then each of us will read a poem by the other that's a favorite of ours. I think Henry's going to let us off with.
Thanks, Rodger. And thanks to Elizabeth, and thanks to Gibson's for having us. We're all a little stripped of context here, except Rodger in his beautiful studio. But I was just thinking back, given that I don't have a context of my own here, just trying to think about poems that are really linked with a particular place or a time in my life. And the first experience I have of a poem and a particular place being linked is that of a lullaby. Having my mother sing to me a cappella from the comfort of my own bed. And another is a different kind of lullaby that I heard when I was in 8th grade. I had my appendix out, taking me out of the last 2 crucial games of the 8th grade basketball season. I was laid up, doped up with some sort of painkillers, and my father read me a lullaby by W.H. Auden that starts, "Lay your sleeping head, my love, human, on my faithless arm." And it wasn't like any lullaby I'd ever heard. It was not meant to put you to sleep exactly, but to wake you up. Or to bridge this gap between waking and sleeping. And it was one of the first experiences I had of a poem working against its own genre, rather than the sound of a mother's voice comforting at night. Another voice that didn't say any words of comfort, but said, "I'm here." This utterance itself is the comfort I have to offer. And I wanted to read one of my own here, one of my own lullabies. I'll give you the text so you can follow along if you like. Lullaby. Time's continuous is what you're taught. Meanwhile, the spiders made traps of the irises. The woods are full of these stories without plot. I found a mushroom white as a dinner plate. They say the edibles mimic the poisonous. Time's continual. Is what you're taught of any use at all? Somehow I forgot the name of whatever's doing in the honeybees. The wards are full. This story has no plot. New blights in the beeches, the ashes, the oaks. The rot spreads night by night, whatever the disease. Time's contiguous is what. You're taught what your parents saw and spoke and thought, except they glossed on purpose the pointlessness the world's so full of. Stories without plot are what I want to hum when the light goes out and the dark comes down between and over us. Time discontinues, and all you're taught is words, words to make stories out of it.
I loved that poem when I first heard it, Henry. Uh, and I have a question. It is a villanelle?
Villanelle, it's a strange old French form. It doesn't always translate well into English, but it relies on the recurrence of these two particular lines, the first line and the third line from the third stanza. And they come back with regularity. But oftentimes they come back just a little bit changed. So times continuous is what you're taught comes back in the second stanza as times continual is what you're taught, but with a period in there. And woods becomes wards, becomes worlds, becomes words. So there's a chance to play on your own choral and your own chorus that you've set up.
Okay, great. No, I loved it. I remember when I first heard it, I knew there was a form and I kept going to Sestina, Pantoum, and I couldn't place it. And then later I thought, it's a villanelle. I loved it. Henry does this next poem, and this is a poem by Henry that I'd love to read. He does something with a pronoun in this poem, and he does something with repetition that the only other poet that reminded me immediately of Galway Canals when one has lived a long, long time alone. It's a sequence of almost sonnets, 11 of them, which begin and end with that exact same line. And I would have thought this cannot be done. And yet when you read that aloud, you realize every one of those 22 lines has a different meaning, a different rhythm to it. And it was a remarkable thing. So when Henry did this poem, I really wanted to read it for him because I enjoy it so much. We thought about putting it on the screen, but I had so much fun reading it from the book that you're going to see me read it from the book as well. The pronoun is it. The title is Presto. Let's play for real this time. I mean it. No matter what, the first one to speak is it. And after that, it's the thing you say that's it. All right? But after that, it's the way you say whatever you say that's it. That's it. No matter what time it is, at school or recess, if the teacher talks, it's how she talks. That's it. And even at dinner, or taking a bath, or if you're asleep, let's say, if you talk in your sleep and I hear you, and it's like you're talking to men on the moon, that's it. You're talking to men on the moon, all right? No matter what. If you're wearing clothes or not, or if you're happy or sad or not, I mean it. Or if you're talking like you're dead, that's it. You're dead, all right? Or if you're dead for real, let's say, and it's like you're talking to me, that's it. You're talking to me, no matter what. And if tomorrow, if I talk like you, that's it. I'm talking you, all right? I mean it, no matter what. For real this time.
Thank you, Rodger. It's not always one gets pleasure of seeing one's own words embodied in someone else, and with the voice that it was meant for, I hope.
Well, I certainly had a thrill. The first time I heard it, I still get a thrill out of reading it. It's just a wonderful sense of wordplay and a range of time and emotion and place. And I think we'll be moving into a couple of my poems here. Like Henry said earlier, place is an important starting point for me. Oftentimes I I often have a poem, but it doesn't come until I find the place uh, where I can reach out and feel that connection, which allows the poem then to come out. It sort of runs on rails back and forth until that place comes. I never know when that's going to be. And I think I do Cannonall. Uh, Cannonall is a place on the island of Sardinia. Okay, it's also a wine growing region on that island. Uh, and it's a wine you can buy in New Hampshire. And when I bought it and looked at the history of that place, I was stunned. They started out by saying the vineyards that are producing this wine are like 800 years old, which was really made me say, I want to taste this. Uh, and then when I read some more, I found out they had done DNA testing on the Grenache grape, which everyone thought had come to Sardinia and Italy from Spain or France. And it turns out, no, the Grenache grape started in Sardinia and was exported out 3,000 to 4,000 years ago, okay, to the rest of the Mediterranean. There are, I think, a couple of other footnotes that will go with this poem. And you'll see them at the bottom. There's a reference to my favorite line, metaphor of all time, which is Wallace Stevens' light is the lion, come down to drink. All my life, I wanted to use that in a poem. I just love that metaphor. And it took me let's see, it's taken me almost 40 years to come up with a poem that I wanted to do. I think everything else is clear. So this is called Cannonall, a glass of wine. The Grenache, before Kaiser, before Etruscans, Sardinian vineyards, as if earth and drink are one. The Joshua tree, history's sequoia. Life's a spectrum. Blood's three-dimensional, more than a pixelated screen. Light is the lion come down to drink. Pride of the pride, Rex Regum in his ruddiness, his earthiness, his hide. But here, with this glass, between the poles of pixelation and abstract depth, reside the larynx and its vibration, the nasal take of oxygen and the shaped tongue, a choral embrace of that first Nurage song. And I noticed, I think I put up an old version because Henry who's an expert on Latin, had no, I had the Latin Regis Rex reversed. So there's, the next time you want a glass of wine, you might check out Cannonall. My theory is it tastes as if you're drinking earth itself.
I love that sense that somehow all these thousands of years of history are contained in the wine itself, in this return and the return year after year of this grape. I have a close friend who's trying to become a master sommelier, and he swears that the only way one begins to tell wine from wine is to taste the differences of time in the grape. I don't know what he means by that, but he says it's possible to taste them. My tongue is not that good.
Neither is mine.
I wanted to read a poem of Rodger's that I like very much. It's in two parts, and while it takes a very different theme for its subject, the idea of song working its way up through the earth and appearing as, if not a vine, then well, you'll see the character in which the song appears. I wanted to share the text again here, if I could. And this is called Two Love Poems. And Rodger's given the very interesting instruction that it has to be listened to over Haydn's Sixth Symphony, second movement, La Matin. And one has to be looking at Thomas Cole's painting, the Oxbow. We can at least do the latter. And as for the former, you may have to go listen to Haydn immediately after this hour. But I'll give you part one here. Christmas. Cloaking worst disputes, masking deepest aches, until the haunting melts surely through. Snow discovers again the house of solstice. Always it has, always it will. Yet in this whiteness, this place of prodigy, a centuries-old concerto can dangle off the lobe of an ear, like a dusty ant nudging another year, first one sharp little twist, then a second for cheer. Or a friend whose words, softly, so crafted, seem to have been not written, but transcend into spring, like rainbow, like Virgo traversing the afternoon of a Hudson River valley until they ascend the green awe of the opposite ridge, where self and space can mate. 2. The other season. Out of this, in the barn by the stall, a daughter practices again her violin, drawing a bow plucked from the tail of her horse, who will fly like Pegasus to lift her over the double oxer and the slate, if that's what it takes to keep her upright, keep her straight, to free from an instrument, music, where fingers confidently fret the neck, independently find the notes, a pitch just shy of perfect, a timing just short of exact. She skips onward with double stops, her mount perks in tune and knickers, honed on the dustings of holiday, her leather, her waxes, her string. Let them romp in these presents and sing, knowing the sway of rhythm, even perfection cannot mind the gap or bridge the strait between those who loved her first and those whose love must wait.
Oh, thank you, Henry, for reading that. Obviously, that's a poem that's very dear to my heart. In fact, the horse that was referenced there, she's now, I think, 36 or 37 years old and still kicking. So she was a wonderful companion for my daughter. You'll see with the, I'll say one thing about the Oxbow, and that one of my first transformational moments with poetry came in high school in the sophomore year, when I saw Albert Bierstadt's Sierra Nevada painting, full color plate, in a textbook next to William Cullen Bryant's Thanatopsis. It's the first time I had seen something. I was stunned by it. And I think for me, I thought, oh, that is something I would love to be and get involved in. I'm not a great artist, but so I try the word end of it. The first part, there's a good friend poem, poet friend of both of us, John Hodgin, who I think I had just read something by him at that point, and I was just amazed at his ability and empathy, and that worked its way in as well. So thank you, Henry, for doing such a good job. And if my daughter, yeah,
I just wanted to say I love the way. I mean, it's a picture in two parts. This the kind of clear sky off to the east and the storm brewing in the west. But then it's so odd to be sent to this picture and then begin the poem in a time of snow and solstice, and just the way spring rises then, Virgo traversing the afternoon like rainbow. I don't know, it just made me realize that yes, these two arts are aligned, but there's also a way in which the poem sets the painting in motion in a way that the painting itself is asking for. The sweep of the oxbow, you're imagining that current down there is moving. You're imagining that the rain is raining and the wind is shaking the gnarled tree, but it doesn't get set in motion until the poem takes over and the music takes over. And anyway, if I were an artist, I'd like to be set in motion that way.
Thanks. Well, I hope he would. One of the other things Henry and I are involved in different ways is the translation process. I've been working for a number of years translating and having poems translated into Mandarin in China. And we use a different process to get, I think, to the same place. I don't know, Henry, why don't you explain how you go about it, and then I'll explain how I go about it. And then you'll hear some of our poems that we do using those processes.
I've just recently gotten involved with an Italian poet named Enrico Testa. Enrico being the Italian for Henry, and Testa meaning head. His name translates to Henry's head. So I'm really already very close to this poet. But I came to translation as a classicist, translating classical texts. There is no other than in the Vatican City, Latin, and Latin is not a living language, which was my study for many years, and ancient Greek as well is just a language of books. And so I've always come to translation not as a speaker, but as the classicist pouring through dictionaries. And something about the chance to, having spent some time in Italy and having been now having a long fling with the Italian language, the chance to translate a living poet has arisen and has been a wonderful collaboration. But it began all on my end, doing versions of some of Enrico's poems and sending them back to him, and our conversation about them is in Italian, which although I feel fairly confident talking about where I can get a cappuccino and which way is the bathroom, when you're talking about shadings of adjectives, words with 2 and 3 meanings, trying to figure out where an English complement can be found, it can be dicey territory, going back and forth in a language that is not one's mother tongue. So I've been learning a huge amount, but it's been mediated just by me and the author without any intermediary, which I think is different than Rodger's process.
Yeah, I use a process that I learned from Stanley Kunitz, the process he used when he translated the Russians, particularly trying to speak Mandarin is probably one of the most difficult things I've ever undertaken in my life, and I failed miserably at it. But we had this opportunity to work with Chinese poets when I was editor at the Worcester Review. And so it was clear that to get Chinese poets translated into English, I wanted someone who was fluent in the Mandarin, and also was pretty good with English to do what I call the original translation or the base. And then I call myself more an editor than a translator. My job was to take that translation and turn it into the finest English that I could summon. The trick, as with, I think, with Henry, is the subtleties. And what is the English equivalent of, say, a Chinese metaphor or idiom? So that involved lots of back and forth with the Mandarin translator. And we learned, Jonesy King out of Nanjing University we learned over the years that we could very easily understand what it was each other was looking for, even to the point where I could explain to Jean, no, there isn't really that English equivalent that way, but there is that English equivalent this way. And it might be a slightly different poem, but the essence of the poem is the same, so that the English reader will pick that out. I think of the example I would give is the title of my book, For All the Tea in Chonghua, which is literally translates For All the Tea in China. Well, they have no expression, since that's a British expression, about how they rob the Chinese of all their wealth. And so he could not come up with a Chinese example of it to translate back into Chinese. And it ended up, I was at my wit's end until I woke up one evening and thought, I got it. And I emailed him and said, it's the same as if you would not trade your mother for all the gold in Nanjing. And he immediately, oh, we have that expression in Mandarin. So that you'll see that sort of leap the other way. And I think, all in all, I've been pretty pleased with how that process has worked out. And it's a different way. I wish I had Henry's affinity for the Italian, but I'm not anywhere close to that. So I think we're each going to read two poems that we've been working on in translations. And I think, Henry, why don't you begin?
Sure. I actually wanted to read one of Enrico Testa's translations of an English poem into Italian. This is how I first came upon his name, Enrico Testa, and it happened because the English poem happens to be one of my favorites. It's Philip Larkin's The Mower, and I'll read them both for you here. The Mower. The mower stalled twice. Kneeling, I found a hedgehog jammed up against the blades, killed. It had been in the long grass. I had seen it before and even fed it once. Now I had mauled its unobtrusive world unmendably. Burial was no help. Next morning I got up and it did not. The first day after a death, the new absence is always the same. We should be careful of each other. We should be kind while there is still time. La falciatrice. La falciatrice si bloccò 2 volte. In ginocchio trovai un porcospino imprigionato tra le lame, ucciso. Era vissuto nell'erba alta del prato. L'aveva già visto e nutrito pure una volta. Adesso avevo distrutto il suo mondo discreto, senza rimedio. Seppellirlo non mi fu di nessun aiuto. Al mattino io mi risvegliai e lui no. Il primo giorno dopo una morte La nuova assenza resta sempre lì, uguale. Dovremmo essere l'uno dell'altro attento e gentili anche, finché c'è un po' di tempo.
Wonderful. May I ask you a question about the translation, Henry?
Yeah.
As I was looking at and reading, you've done the 3-line stanza as the original. Are each of those lines pretty much a mirror of the Italian, or do some of the lines break differently in English?
So this is Enrico Testa's translation of Larkin's poem. So in this case, Testa was coming second, and he was extremely faithful. It's really what one would call a literal translation at almost every point. I mean, it wouldn't be different had he been writing in prose, except for this one line, "Resta sempre lì, uguale," which is the third line from the last, and it translates "is always the same." The new absence is always the same, and something different happens in Italian, because he says that "resta sempre lì" can mean it's always there, dash uguale, meaning equal or the same. But resta sempre lì, resta is like requiescat in pace. It's physically to lie there. It's always lying there. The new absence is always lying there. And then there's a gap, this caesura in the middle of the line, where you just take a gulp. Uguale. And something touched me about that. Not quite my funny bone, but whatever the opposite of the funny bone is, the morbid bone. Italians say uguale when it means there's no difference. It doesn't make any difference. Don't worry your head over it. È uguale. And there's something just of the everyday spirit of the Italian language, who sort of reared his head there and put a stamp on the poem, making something abstract, an absence, all of a sudden become physical. It's lying there in front of you. And in the face of it, all you can do is sort of wave your hands in an Italian gesture that's more eloquent than words, and say, uguale. There's nothing that can be done about it. And this is what sent me looking for Enrico Testa's poems, just because I thought, wow, that's an awfully sensitive reading of this poem. I sent him a few of my translations of his poems, and he said, please, you have to continue. This is good work. So I'll read you one of my translations of Enrico Testa's original poems here. And I'll just read the English. It takes place in a train station, and it's called Track 20. For almost 2 months, and it will last till fall, the bougainvillea blooms hang on beside Track 20 at the far north end of the station. Year after year, it comes up and covers, leggily, impulsively, whole stretches of thick-laid, rusty brick of the railroad grade. Remote origins, Yolosa, say, on the valley floor, winding down from Cumbre. Rainforests, lush and green, peppered with splashes of orange or purple, the Yungas. Or further on, Arapata or Tulumani, from which travelers brought it as far as this city. Platform is empty. For a moment, silent. Behind a column, two of uncertain age, wrapped in each other, kissing. Just as ancient and great, and not unlike a fling among showy tropical bracts, this story of theirs, lips pressed in a talismanic seal. But one that goes, even here among these thorns of letters or prayers, unseen and unsaid, like a treasure pawned, not forfeit yet. There's something, it turned out in as it turned out, this is a poet who is totally compelled by the landscape and the language and the strange world of the New World. This is these place names from the first half of the poem: Yolosa, the Yungas, Arapata, Chulumani. These are places in Bolivia where he's traveled many times. And it struck me as a different sort of translation that needs to be done here, where for me, Italy is this place of far-flung wealth of history and language, and a world I've always wanted to know more deeply. Here I'm translating an Italian for whom the New World and its jungles is calling, and I realize there's a limit to what I can translate here as a translator. I can give the words, but I can't give that sense of an Italian yearning back to the New World. But here it's triggered just by the sight of bougainvillea at the side of a railroad track, and that sends him back in his mind to the origins of that plant, which are distant in place and time. And in one way or another, almost all of Enrico Testa's poems are efforts to translate himself from one landscape into another, and often just by an effort of memory.
Wonderful.
His style is very far from mine, but it's all the more exciting to kind of take up somebody else's voice as a ventriloquist and try to imagine what life would be like if one wrote in this way.
Thank you. I'm going to, let's see, the translation process with China also has an element that isn't present in Europe, in which, of course, you are accountable for what you say to the government. And I was never made more aware of this than in the first poem that I will share. And what I learned back in '89 at Tiananmen Square was, in China, you're always accountable for what you wrote, whether it was last year or 30 years ago. And that there may be an opening where you were free to write, but if there's a closing, as there was after many of those poets were then caught up in that closing because of what they wrote 10 years earlier. And I recall meeting with some of the Chinese Fulbright poets at Harvard for dinner one evening shortly after that. And I realized at that time I was younger and they were older. And it struck me that they may never see an opening up again for their poetry in their lifetime. This next poem is one by a younger poet who had been visiting, and I brought him up to Keene State Del Rossi's. We were having a dinner at Del Rossi's, and he had asked me to work on this poem, which let's see if I can find it. It's called A Mongolian Knife. I think this is it. Nope, that's Cannonall. No. Well, I will read it because I can't find the poem. I will not put the Chinese up, and I think you'll see why when I read it. We published this in the Worcester Review, and when we sent copies to China, we literally cut that page, the Chinese page, out. The issue in China is not so much what you say in English. It's oftentimes what you say in Mandarin that gets you in trouble. And the only other thing I would say about this is think of Tibet and Hong Kong. This was long before that. Mongolia, of course, is in two sections: Outer Mongolia, which is an independent nation, and Inner Mongolia, which is still controlled by China. And of course, both were from where Genghis Khan and Kublai Khan originated, the Mongol or the Golden Horde. It's titled A Mongolian Knife. It dropped from horseback like a small dragon falling from the sky. After rotting, only teeth are left. An old eagle shot by a poison arrow. After cooking, only claws are left. I can use it to kill an eagle or a horse, even a dragon. Under the haze of drink, it will kill a hen and take out an egg. It will force a monkey to surrender its brains. Where the knife point touches, the desert gives birth to a lake. Where the blade cuts, a wilderness puts forth a road. After a soundless war, it will cut into its master's pulse, then shoulder the widow's heart, and insert itself into the pool of the plain's blood. Songs of generations have sharpened it. The blood of generations has refurbished it. Let its keenness take enemies' heads 1,000 miles away. Let its chilliness threaten 10,000 years later. And I just would not feel, I don't think I could live with myself had I let the Chinese version go into China. He taught and he works in Beijing, uh, and he's a fairly well-known poet. And I just did not want to be responsible for that. If he publishes the poem in China, then the responsibility is on his head, not mine. But that's another issue that we deal with sometimes with translation. That's not uh, often a worry with, say, Europe. Not that it won't be in this age of internet and things like that. Who knows whether we're going down that road ourselves? I don't know, but it seems you're responsible now for anything you did, even as a silly teenager, if you posted it on the internet. The next poem is more traditional. This poet is named Bulan Shen. This is more of what most people might think of a Chinese poem. Very, very symbolic, very abstract, and you can dig deep in here. And of course, Chinese poets learn to bury their symbols and their layers very deeply, so that they're there, but they're not easy for a censor to pick up. And you'll see this one in both versions. Bulan Chen, who actually has visited, I think, on the Poetry Building Bridges uh, before COVID, sort of put an end of all of these things for a while. It's titled A Tree. A reflection is a ray of light that barely penetrates bedrock. A tree's reflection ripples on the river, the point of contact between water and air. Two opposing visions on a jittery plane, nothing to do with humanity. This tree, alone, unnamed, no instruction from anyone, absent in its own thinking, stands, the only original shape of its world. And I just love that sense that we're there in that tiny reflection between the future and the past. And that's, in a sense, all we are. And we tend to think we are so much more than that. Uh, I love this poem. It just, I don't know, it spoke to me in a way few poems do, and it still does. Uh, the one place where I wanted, because I loved it, I wanted to change a line. I wanted to put that stands after thinking, but in the Mandarin, stands is in that second line, second to last line. And I thought, for some reason, I felt this translation didn't need me tinkering with that the power is there. And so I didn't do what I might have done had a poem not struck so deep within me there. So that's another way in which the translation works. And I wouldn't even attempt, as Henry did with the Italian, to try and enunciate the Mandarin.
I love that. I mean, what a great symbol of translation itself, that the reflection of light we see and the reflection of light on the water, and somehow behind both of those two is the tree itself, the poem itself, that is somehow it exists in its English version and in its Mandarin version, but also sort of in both and behind both reflections. Well, I'll publish that that theory in a separate paper.
You're welcome to it, Henry. Thank you. Oh, we're getting on in time. So, Elizabeth, do we have time for a couple new poems, or do we go to question and answer?
I think we have time for a few more poems.
So, Henry, what should we do? Some new ones?
That'd be great.
Okay. Why don't I start with one from, this actually just came out as I was driving home from Pennsylvania this weekend after visiting family. After having gotten both vaccinations, I feel a little bit liberated that I can go places again. So I got to see my family in Pennsylvania for the first time in almost 2 years. This one is also written with a musical piece in mind, which I believe is on chat as well. It's a piano piece by On Point Dancer by Karen Marie Garrett. My mother was taught ballet. She was British. She was a dancer. And so when I was young, she died when I was young, but my memories of her before that was of her teaching dance lessons. I laugh now saying this, in a auditorium above Kaufman's hardware store in Amish country, Pennsylvania, on a hot summer afternoon. And I think that music brought a memory back to me that I had not known I had. And when it brought it back, it carried into this poem. And so I feel obligated to honor the music, which was part of the inspiration for this as well. On Point Dancer. A boy, small enough to sit on the box-like windowsill along the edge of wood, lacquering the vacant second floor of Kaufman's hardware store. Stares across a valley of corn to the inventor's house on the next ridge. He who invented some machinery to better the machinery that had made this small town famous. He who created wonder, mystery, as the dozing summer heat settled slowly through open tops of windows. His mother, piano player and dancer, teaches a room of young girls, all waif-like dreams behind the boy focused on the inventor's home, which marked the boundary between days sown and those hidden adventures to come on the far side of that ridge. The boy must have known each one of the danseuses as they pirouetted and curtsied to the notes from his mother's piano. But the man remembers none of this, all an unfocused musing. Even his mother, gone now 65 years, but well played keys nudge that closed door open. The man amazed at how melodies find a boy still there, still sitting, still wondering, still choosing. So I'm just very indebted to Karen Marie Garrett for that song, which got to a place I didn't know I had.
I'm going right over to listen. That's beautiful, Rodger.
Henry, why don't you give us one?
All right, here's a poem whose music is very wintry, but winter breaking apart. It's called Laws of Contraband. And its music is only this sharp crack I heard. Laws of Contraband. Breaking trail in 22 below, the woods asleep. I glance at a sweet birch just at the split second. Whop! Its bark is blown apart. A scar the size of a backbone gapes where skin had been. Months from now, in better weather, mushrooms known as razor strop will colonize the seam like silver buttons. Edible but bitter, says my pocket guide, as if to apologize for where they grew. Contrary to belief, a crack's a form of bond. Divide the cell against itself, and lo, there's room for gossiping, for commerce to and fro, for goods to traffic, taxes to levy, imperial rules and edicts, signet rings and sealing wax. When I am king, let the royal road run straight up the spine of the continent, a birthmark scored through fold and fallow, townland and parkland, past bondsman and highwayman, tenant and lord. Let all fare freely upon it, the wise and the ignorant, sheriffs and outlaws, loyal or not. What ratifies our majesty? Wounds we wear, half healed, half rot.
I love that ending. I'm also amazed at how well you can write short lines, which I'm always nervous when I try it, and you still manage to make a short line sing.
Thanks, Rodger.
Maybe the last one I will share is another poem that was recently published. One of the other things that shows up, because I do a lot of journalism, I happen to love politics. I've been told sometimes there's too much politics sneaking into, but this is one where you might find it. I just won't say where, since, but It's there. It's called Once Upon a Time Returned. If somewhere in the violet depths of dusk a warbling vireo sings, reassess the blasphemy of this time and know you are not lost, though the race may well be. Settle next the echoes of the wood thrush. Let silence between notes resonate upon the skin and walk to Elmwood Station. Cross over the tracks and board that tiny locomotive which thinks it can, yes it can, chugging its confessional to the next station of the senses. As the engine's vapor slows, alight onto the steamy breath of an August platform. Sit a while on the bench as the scent of old carbon reminds us we too are white-throated sparrows, sad Sam Peabodys, and our music must fly south too, if ever someone is to hear of it fly again. Yes, there on the hill slavers a rabid dog so timid in his rigid trembling, he's become certain in savageness, driven to lacerate, clueless that sunlight will bleach his bones, just like the others. Greenery for next season's song. I realize that that's a companion piece to your platform Italian poem, Henry.
It is, with the ghostlier train. For as far as I know, the train hasn't been through Elmwood Station for many a year.
Yes, many, many years.
I love that, and I just heard my first Sam Peabody singing in from the tree line the day before yesterday. So, yeah, the greenery's coming.
Okay. I'm going to mute myself because my clock is chiming, but
one last poem, Elizabeth, or should we be done?
Let's wrap it up with one last poem from you, Henry.
All right, good. This is a poem called Shoot the Moon, and it depends a little bit on knowing a children's game, which has two metal rods suspended slightly like so, and a metal ball here at the end. I wish I had it here to demonstrate. As you separate the rods, the ball actually begins rolling slightly up, or appears to be rolling up, up those rods. And if you get it all the way to the top, you drop it into a little slot that says the moon. And up until 1969, that was the only way a child could conceive of getting to the moon. Let me share it for you. Here it is. And it's to the tune of Had Gadya, but I won't attempt to sing it for you, just in my own voice. Shoot the moon. The object of this game's one metal ball made on precarious rails to fall uphill. A metal ball that rises slippingly between two rails, a hoax, a mystery. No need to hyperbolize terrestrial routes we reckon on. A metal ball an inch above the earth happens to go of its own accord another inch or so. Consider yourself free to concentrate the mind on matters of less calculable weight. Public bedlams, war in Syria, ice shelves evacuating out to sea, a trickle of loose scree forecasting avalanche, climber clipping in under the ledge, a rift arriving, a house with no one home, a couple eloped there once upon a time. Downward, forward, galaxies enthrall to constants coded in material. Only a fluke attention lavishes praise on a metal ball for wherever it goes. Consider yourself free. It's free to play a game without an object. Bet against the house. Ante your whole inheritance. Precarious descends from sounds that meant to pray. You, rails of the least visible phase of the moon, with your compulsory unclasping of bone from bone, of hands at noon, of means from ways, compel me willfully, contrariwise. Thank you so much, Rodger, for agreeing to read with such a ne'er-do-well, and thank you to Gibson's for putting this all together.
Oh, Henry, you don't do yourself service. I should be thanking you for sharing the evening with me. And thank you, Elizabeth and Gibson's, for sharing both of us.
And I will thank the both of you for a wonderful evening of verse and poetry. This has been lovely, and I would like to remind our audience that Henry and Rodger's books are available from Gibson's Bookstore. And thank you to Hobblebush Books for helping us set up this month-long series of poetry readings by Granite State authors. Thank you so much for joining us, gentlemen, and thank you to our audience. Have a great night, everybody.